They sealed the file for 90 years, not because they couldn't solve it, but because they did, and what they found no man should ever have known, not even in whispers, not even in dreams. In the winter of 1887, a sickness crawled through London's wealthiest streets, disguised as laughter. It didn't come with a knife in the dark. It didn't come with screams. It came with joy, unnatural joy, laughter that didn't belong in this world. And every time it echoed through the fog, someone died. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. This case was never closed, only buried. What we're about to uncover isn't just a forgotten murder spree. It's a gateway into something much older, older than the Empire, older than England itself. Beneath the cobblestones of Belgravia, beneath the powdered faces and polished boots of Victorian high society, there was rot. Not metaphorical rot, ritual rot. Laughter was just the symptom. The disease, something far more sophisticated, something crafted. The victims' faces were always the same, frozen in ecstasy, mouths wide, eyes twinkling, as if they'd seen something divine, at the exact moment their souls left their bodies. But their hands told a different story. Torn fingernails, defensive wounds, throats purpled with resistance. Their final moments weren't peaceful. They fought, they screamed, but whatever they saw at the end made them laugh. It wasn't madness, it was method. And behind it all, one figure, always unseen, always unheard, but always felt. Witnesses reported only one strange clue before each killing, a slow-building laugh echoing down the foggy alleys of Belgravia. Not cruel, not mocking, joyful, pure, childlike. And that was the most terrifying part. This killer didn't just take lives, he rewrote death. And when Scotland Yard's top investigator vanished mid-case, leaving behind a single note that read, "The laughter never stops, it follows you home," they locked the truth away. But now, we're breaking it open. What you're about to hear is not a story, it's a dismantling of the version of history you were taught to believe, a descent. Not into crime, but into theater, science, madness, and something older than all of them. And if you listen long enough, you may hear it too. That laughter, coming from behind the door you thought was locked. It began, as these things often do, with a house no one wanted. No. 43. Dellington Lane was grand, yes. Tall windows, iron balconies, Corinthian columns, a symbol of Victorian elegance. But the servants refused to stay past sundown. Neighbors walked on the opposite side of the street, and the chimney, even in summer, belched smoke as if it had its own heartbeat. The previous owner, a wealthy barrister named Elliot Thorne, was found smiling in his study, eyes wide, teeth cracked from the force of his final grin. He had no enemies, no debts, no wounds, just that awful, locked-on smile. And in his lap, a children's book, one that didn't belong to any of his children, one that hadn't been printed in over 60 years. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this is the part the newspapers refused to print. The book was bound in green velvet. The cover, a crudely drawn jester, mid-laugh, dancing in a graveyard. There were no words inside, just page after page of grotesque illustrations, men dancing on meat hooks, nuns with no eyes, kings with no tongues. And always, always the jester watching from the corner, its grin stretching longer with every page. Inspector Thomas Bell was assigned to the case, a rational man, former military, known for cracking the Coburg Bank disappearances and the Chiswick child theft ring. Bell didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or curses. He believed in people. And he believed Elliot Thorne had been murdered. But what Bell didn't expect, what none of them expected, was that as soon as the case file was opened, things started to shift. Gas lamps in the yard began flickering only when Bell entered. His dog, normally docile, bit him without warning, and worse. Bell started laughing in his sleep, not a chuckle, not a snore, but a full-bodied, joyous howl. He didn't remember doing it. His wife begged him to leave the case, but Bell pressed on, convinced someone was orchestrating the terror. He mapped each death, each clue, and found something impossible. Every victim's home, every alley, every cobblestone where that laugh was last heard, formed a perfect geometric pattern across London. Not a random pattern, not a scatter of crimes. It was a sigil, and in the center of it all, no. 43 Dellington Lane, the house no one wanted, the house that called him back. They found his boots first, polished, upright, placed neatly outside the door of 43 Dellington Lane, as if he'd simply stepped out of them mid-thought. Inside, the house was warm, fire still glowing, kettle whistling, but Bells was gone. No signs of struggle, no blood, no forced entry, just one thing left behind, his notebook placed open on the parlor table. The final page read, "He's not a man. He was never a man. He's the sound between silence." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because from this point on, the official records stop. And what remains is buried in private collections, backroom testimonies, and the kind of whisper truths only madmen dare to repeat. The Yard closed the case, filed it under investigator dereliction. But in the weeks that followed, others began to vanish. A clergyman from Whitehall, a violinist from South Kensington, a seamstress from Brixton, all found with that same haunting smile, all clutching something. Sometimes it was a marionette, sometimes a cracked mirror. One man held a red balloon tied to a fingerless glove. Boo. But always the same smell lingered in the air, lavender, cloves, and smoke. The fog in London grew thicker, colder. It clung to window panes and drifted through cracks in the walls. And every so often, just past midnight, residents of Dellington Lane swore they heard music. Carnival music. Distant, broken, like a fairground spinning in the dark. By February of 1888, a name had started to circulate. Not in the press, not in the police reports, but in whispers between maids and milkmen, in chalk scrawled beneath bridges, in the ramblings of asylum patients who screamed until their tongues blistered. They called him the Laughing Gentleman. Not a ghost, not quite. He was something between presence and performance. A character too old to be remembered, too persistent to be erased, and they said if you heard his laughter and laughed back, you were marked, not killed, converted. Because the Laughing Gentleman didn't want death, he wanted audience, and that's what made him different. He wasn't hunting, he was staging something, and London was his theater. But the most chilling part, what the doctors at Bethlem Royal Infirmary began reporting in secret, was this. Some victims came back. They smiled, they stared, and they asked for tickets. March 3rd, 1888. A boy named Ellis Fay wandered into Bethlem Asylum's south courtyard at dawn. He wore no shoes. His eyes were ringed with soot, but it was the smile that froze the guard mid-step. That impossible ear-to-ear grin pulled so tight it cracked his lips. Ellis was 8 years old, missing for 12 days. Last seen playing near the old music hall on Pembridge Street. When the doctors questioned him, he didn't blink, didn't flinch. He simply whispered one sentence over and over. The curtain hasn't fallen yet. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because Ellis's testimony was lucky. Cut away by the Crown within hours, but we have it, and once you hear it, you'll understand why they tried to erase it. Dr. Henry Malloran took the lead on Ellis's case. At first, he diagnosed the boy with catatonic schizophrenia, likely caused by exposure, trauma, or abuse. But the scans, rudimentary as they were, showed no signs of damage, no fever, no dehydration, no bruises, just one strange anomaly. Ellis's pupils reacted to music, not light, music. Whenever a lullaby or nursery rhyme was hummed near him, his heart rate rose, his fingers twitched, and once, when a nurse accidentally dropped a wind-up music box, Ellis laughed. That same full-bodied, joyous, howling laugh reported by Bell's wife before his disappearance. But the most disturbing moment came on day 5. Ellis asked for paper, a crayon. He drew a theater, Victorian, red curtains, dusty chandelier, empty seats. But on the stage stood a figure, not fully human, not fully drawn, just a suggestion of a man, top hat, long coat, mouth wide open, arms extended, above him written in childish scrawl, "Tonight only the gentleman returns." Dr. Malloran filed the drawing as evidence and began his own investigation. He traced the phrase to a banned children's book series from 1824, The Gentleman's Hour, written by an anonymous author under the pen name Mr. Note. Only 3 copies are known to exist. Each one is handwritten, each one slightly different. In one copy, the gentleman teaches children how to smile even when they're alone. In another, he rewards those who laugh when others cry. But in the final version, the version Malloran saw with his own eyes, there's a page that simply reads, "Don't clap, he's not done yet." And that night, Dr. Malloran stopped showing up to work. His flat was untouched, no sign of a struggle, only one thing out of place: a velvet glove, still warm, draped neatly across his pillow. By spring, London's fog had become a character in itself. It moved unnaturally, coiling in alleyways that weren't there yesterday. Pressing against the windows of the Seine like a living thing, people whispered that it was listening, that it would press tighter if you spoke his name after dark. Then came the case of Margaret Lyle, widow, seamstress, devout churchgoer. She hadn't missed a Sunday Mass in 30 years. Until April 12, 1888, when she stood up mid-sermon, turned to the congregation, and began to applaud, not slowly, not mockingly, but with the wild, joyous rhythm of someone watching a finale no one else could see. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what Margaret said before they pulled her away is a line I've never forgotten. She said, "I see the strings now. I know who's pulling them." They found her home in chaos, chairs overturned, candles burned down to the floorboards. But in her sewing room, everything was pristine. Dozens, no hundreds of marionettes lined the walls, each carved from bone-white wood, each with a smile, and in the center of the room, a stage, a perfect miniature of Dellington Lane, every house, every window, even a tiny replica of Margaret herself stitched in lace and cloth. The only building missing? 43 Dellington Lane. Instead, in its place, a small black box, no windows, no door, just one phrase carved on its roof in a hand far too precise for Margaret's old fingers. The show begins when you stop pretending it isn't real. Her diary offered no explanations, only lists. Lists of names. Some were neighbors, some long dead, some not yet born. The final page contained a riddle. He enters stage left when the children stop singing. He exits stage right when the doctor stops breathing. But the encore... And then it stops. The pen bled into the page. The ink trailed off like a hand that had been pulled away mid-sentence. Margaret Lyle died 3 days later in a locked room with no windows. No one touched her. No knee entered, but every doctor present swore they heard clapping echo down the corridor as her body went cold, and when the nurse closed her eyes, she found a slip of paper tucked beneath the pillow. Just 2 words. Your turn. May 1st, 1888. 3 constables entered the tunnels beneath Whitechapel Station following reports of children vanishing through cracks in the brickwork. Locals claimed they heard music, tinny, old-fashioned, impossibly distant, drifting from below after midnight. One mother said her son followed a trail of sugar cubes into a drain and never came back. The constables were never seen again, but their lanterns were found still burning 5 days later, arranged in a perfect triangle, deep in a maintenance shaft that didn't exist on any city plans. The walls were scorched, not by fire but by fingerprints, dozens, maybe hundreds, small, child-sized, burnt into stone as if the brick had welcomed the touch. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what they found scrawled on the inside of one constable's helmet will stay with me forever. Applause is permission. The case was quietly buried. Officials blamed gas leaks, vagrants, delirium. But privately, certain members of Parliament began receiving letters, black envelopes, no return address. Inside, a single playing card, blank on one side and on the other, a woodcut illustration of a theater curtain half opened. No words, just the image, always half opened. And with it came a new fear, the fear that something hadn't just returned, but had always been here, watching, waiting, playing to an audience that had long since forgotten they were even in a theater. Dr. Theodoric Vale, a fringe academic at King's College, proposed something radical, that the gentleman wasn't a ghost or a legend, but a ritual, a recurring psychological architecture that demanded performance. He called it the Black Stage Theory. His claim? Every 37 years, the same symbols return. A child disappears while laughing. An adult applauds at nothing. A doctor draws a curtain he can't remember closing. And a theater appears where none should be. And when all four converge, a fifth sign manifests, the one who bows. Dr. Vale believed this figure was a catalyst, not a demon, not a man, but a role, played by anyone, anytime, if the ritual finds fertile ground. He vanished in June, left behind a stack of journals and a cracked phonograph that plays only one song, a twisted lullaby played backwards over and over. Don't look up, don't stand still, the show must end, but not until... And then, scratching, like someone clapping with broken fingers. By July, the fog in East London had begun to hum. It wasn't wind, it wasn't machinery. It was lower than that, felt in the jawbone, like a voice just below hearing, and it centered around one address, 43 Dellington Lane. Except now, it was visible. Neighbors said it hadn't been there before, not physically, but now, overnight, it stood plain as day. Black brick, slate roof, no door, no windows, just a tall, soot-stained chimney that never stopped smoking, even on windless nights. The city claimed it didn't exist. Postal records skipped over the number. Building permits leapt from 41 to 45. But the children saw it. They played around it, dared each other to touch it. One girl swore she saw her dead grandmother waving from the chimney smoke, mouthing a word she wouldn't repeat. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because what happened to that girl, Elsie Bromwell, is burned into every page of the forgotten file buried at the British Library under lock and key. Elsie went missing on July 17th. Last seen at the edge of the Black House whispering to the bricks. When her mother found her shoe, it was filled with teeth. Human. Milk teeth. Some still bloody. Some decade old. But the real horror came later, when Scotland Yard sent 2 men to investigate 43 Dellington Lane. Their report contained only one sentence. There is no house, but it saw us anyway. They both quit the force. One drowned in the Thames 3 nights later, the other lives in a sanitarium in Yorkshire and has never spoken again. But he draws. Every day, dozens of pages, same image, a marionette with hollow eyes and a human heart nailed to its chest, standing in front of a black stage, bowing, always bowing. And then came the fog prints, pressed into the soot around 43 Dellington Lane, bare feet, tiny, dozens of them, as if children had been walking in and out of the bricks themselves. One constable tried to cover them. He vanished within the hour. His whistle was found hanging from the iron fence, twisted into a perfect treble clef. That night, the chimney screamed, not smoke, not wind. Screamed, a sound like broken violins and babies crying backwards. Windows up and down the lane shattered, and etched into the glass in curling, perfect cursive. The curtain is almost ready. August 4th, 1888. At precisely 3:33 a.m., all the clocks in Whitechapel stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Pocket watches, tower bells, train signals, even the timepieces worn by the Royal Observatory staff. For exactly 7 minutes and 11 seconds, time itself held its breath. And when it resumed, someone had rewound the stage. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this is the moment when the gentleman stopped being folklore and became a performance. That morning, a boy named Isaac Flint was found standing barefoot in the center of Wilkins Square, eyes rolled back, mouth open in a silent scream. His palms were bleeding, carved with tiny oval shapes, not random, not chaotic, but organized, sheet music. Tiny musical notes etched into flesh like an orchestra had written its finale in blood. He hadn't slept in days. Neighbors said he wandered the streets humming songs that didn't exist. He knocked on doors at midnight asking if the matinee had started. And then, silence, not just from Isaac, but from everything. No birds, no carts, no street vendors, just stillness. And then came the applause, soft, polite, wrong, echoing from alleyways and chimneys, from wells and cracks in the street. No people, just sound. Someone, somewhere, was clapping for a performance no one remembered seeing. And in Isaac's pocket they found a single item, a child's ticket stub, not paper, bone, smooth and white, stamped with the words, "One admittance, curtain must fall." That same day, 3 separate coroners in London resigned after a body arrived at their offices bearing no features, no eyes, mouth, ears, or even skin, just a smooth, mannequin-like surface and a sewn-shut mouth made of human hair. The victim was dressed in full theater attire, tuxedo, gloves, polished shoes, pinned to the lapel, a tag that read, "Understudy, didn't know the lines." The medical examiner who dared to dissect the corpse collapsed mid-autopsy. His assistant claimed he whispered the same phrase over and over, tears streaming from his eyes. "We're not watching the play. We're in it." And then, the final clue. A crumpled poster found nailed behind the walls of the Aldgate station, dated 1892. 4 years in the future. It advertised a single-night performance. The gentleman returns. 1 night only. Children free. But beneath that, in faint red script, no exits, no light, no survivors. The fog began to hum again, but this time it wasn't confined to East London. It spread, sliding under doors in Bristol, curling through alleyways in Manchester, even rising from the soil in far-off Aberdeen. Entire villages reported the same sound, a low, vibrating murmur, like a theater warming up before the curtain lifts. But there was no curtain, only silence, and shadows that moved differently when no one was looking. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this is when the gentleman stopped hiding in whispers and stepped into history. August 6th. A train bound for King's Cross arrived 17 minutes late. No big deal, until investigators opened the last passenger car. Every seat was filled. But the passengers weren't alive. They were perfectly dressed, upright, still warm, but no pulses, no respiration, no signs of trauma. Each wore a paper mask over their face, blank, white, featureless. A note pinned to the conductor's vest read, "Late to the performance," but they clapped anyway. One journalist from the Pall Mall Gazette snuck into the car that night. He returned raving about a red velvet stage hidden beneath the seats, and a man with no face rehearsing silently in the aisle. His final article was published posthumously, 2 hours before his body was discovered, folded neatly inside a cello case, every bone dislocated but unbroken, as if his flesh had been poured in. On the same day, in Devonshire, 12 children disappeared from St. Elma's School for the Deaf. They were found hours later sitting in the woods, forming a perfect circle, eyes closed, fingers raised, conducting music only they could hear. When asked what they were doing, they signed in unison, "Learning the finale." And from that moment on, the gentleman's symbols began appearing everywhere, carved into tree bark, scratched into church pews, painted on the ceilings of sleeping infants, always the same motif, a puppet suspended by invisible strings, and beneath it, in curling script, "The stage remembers." Priests began refusing to preach in certain towns, choirs disbanded claiming the notes on their pages had shifted, and one conductor, Elias Thorne of the Royal Philharmonic, collapsed mid-performance, his arms jerking wildly as if pulled by unseen wires. He died hours later, whispering one phrase through a mouthful of blood. "He's tuning the world." The fog thickened, and beneath it, across an empire built on logic and reason, something began to rehearse. They burned the theater, all of it, every seat, every curtain, every beam soaked in kerosene and set alight by trembling hands. The townspeople of Whitechapel gathered in the rain, watching the fire consume the Holloway Playhouse, the last known location tied to the gentleman's earliest sightings. But fire doesn't destroy what was never built by human hands. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this is when they realized the gentleman's stage wasn't in the building. It was underneath. The flames rose high, but no smoke came. Instead, the fire burned blue, and from within the collapsing rafters, witnesses claimed they saw rows of figures applauding, not screaming, not running, just clapping. The next day, the ground beneath the theater cracked open. A sinkhole, they said, but the first men lowered into it returned with objects that should not have existed. An usher's tray made of human teeth, each molar engraved with a musical note. A child's drawing scrawled in black wax. A theater with no exits, and stick figures seated with strings leading up not to the ceiling but into the darkness above. And at the deepest level, a door. Not just any door, it was sculpted from petrified wood, bound in brass, carved with hundreds of tiny hands reaching inward like the entire structure was pulling something inside itself. No hinges, no handle, but one line etched at eye level. Curtain call, for those who stayed until the end. When the team returned to seal the hole, one man was missing. His rope was cut clean, not frayed, just severed. And his final words, caught by the sound recorder they left behind, were not in his voice. This was only Act 1. That night across England, performers began to disappear. Opera singers vanished mid-note, pianists found dead at their key, eyes, fingers crushed, but still twitching in rhythm. Entire vaudeville troupes gone without a trace, their dressing rooms smeared with stage directions written in ash: smile wider, scream softer, die slower. And then came the letters, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside, each contained two things: a single theater ticket printed on dried animal skin and a line of dialogue. The same line, always: when the gentleman bows, you don't clap, you pray. Whatever had been hiding beneath the theater wasn't buried. It had just been waiting for an audience. The invitations kept coming, not just to actors, not just to musicians. They arrived for anyone who had once stood in front of others: priests, teachers, auctioneers, lawyers. Each letter sealed in crimson wax, stamped with a grotesque emblem, a mouth sewn shut by violin strings. And inside, always the same whispering paper ticket: final rehearsal, one night only, attendance is compulsory. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this is where the gentleman began recasting the world. A vicar in Kent received one, burned it, laughed it off. That night, he was found in the pulpit, mouth widened beyond human anatomy, teeth shattered outward like glass, as if something had tried to pull a louder performance from inside him. In Glasgow, a retired actress slit her own wrists in front of a mirror, but not before writing one final line in lipstick: "He's using my voice now. I can hear it walking." No one knew who was next, but the pattern grew crueler, more deliberate. Whole towns began to mimic theater sets. The architecture twisted, windows appeared where there were none before, doors widened into perfect stage shapes. In some homes, families awoke to find their furniture rearranged into audience seating, all facing their bed, like something had been watching them sleep over and over, waiting for the right cue. It wasn't just the world changing, it was being rehearsed. Survivors described phantom stage dire, fictions appearing in the air, hazy script floating just above eye level like projected smoke. Enter slowly with regret. Deliver the line like you're hiding something. Pause. Smile. Remember what you lost. One man, a linguist named Dr. Harold Fox, began decoding these phrases and cross-referencing them with classical tragedies. What he discovered broke him. The phrases weren't random. They matched a lost Elizabethan script, one never performed, supposedly written in a fevered trance by a forgotten playwright who died before completing it. A script known only by rumor called "The Play That Ends the World." And at the center of every scene, a faceless figure, never named, never speaking, only described once. He bows, they forget their names, the curtains never rise again. Dr. Fox set himself on fire 2 weeks later, but not before mailing a single burned page to the British Museum. On it, scrawled in blood and ink, were 6 words: "He doesn't want applause, just obedience." The first recorded performance occurred in 1907, or rather, what was left of it. A traveling troupe from Edinburgh known as the Hollow Light Society had accepted a last-minute invitation to perform in the ruins of the Holloway Playhouse. Yes, the same one burned to the ground years earlier. The location was off books, no stage, just blackened stone and scorched soil. But when they arrived, a full theater stood waiting. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this is when the gentleman finally stepped into the light. There were no lights, no gas lamps, no candles, and yet the stage glowed softly with a hue no one could name. The actors, all 10, took their places, though none could later remember rehearsing anything. The audience, silent, faces obscured by shadows, even from the front row. The violinist began to play, notes slow, trembling, dissonant, not part of any known score. Then came the monologue, spoken not by the lead actor, but by the prompter, a mute woman named Eliza Green, who had never spoken on stage in her life. Her voice was not hers. Deeper, fractured, it echoed strangely, like it was bouncing between ribs rather than walls. What she said is mostly lost. Only 2 lines remain from eyewitnesses, both identical from multiple accounts. You came for meaning, you will leave with shape. By the end of the act, every actor had vanished mid-scene, not walked off, not slipped behind a curtain, simply ceased to exist one by one, as if the play no longer needed them, except for Eliza. She remained seated center stage, eyes wide open, mouth slack, still whispering, though her throat had been cut all the way through. A local journalist, Harold Dent, later snuck in and took photographs. When he developed them, every frame was perfectly black, except one. A blurry image of the stage, empty, except for a tall figure at center, bowing, arms open, palms up, head lowered. Where the face should be, nothing, not even skin, just a void. A silhouette shaped like obedience. Dent went mad. He was institutionalized 2 weeks later after screaming in a crowded cafe, "It's not a performance, it's a draft, we're still being edited." Later that year, hundreds of identical posters appeared overnight in towns across the UK, stapled to trees, lampposts, and church doors. The design was minimalist, red ink, plain text. "The Gentleman Returns, one night only, no curtain, no exit, no name," and underneath, hand scrawled in what appeared to be human hair, "We are all understudies now." By 1910, silence had become dangerous. Librarians went mute overnight. Opera houses banned intermissions. Children who played pretend on foggy streets were found in alleyways, frozen mid-gesture, as if caught in a scene they hadn't been told would end. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the gentleman no longer needed a theater. He had turned the world into one. Whispers started in psychiatric wards. Patients described identical dreams, a door behind the moon, a velvet curtain inside their own mouths, and a man with no face who stood too still to be human. The most unnerving detail, they all reported the same phrase being whispered in their ears before waking: "You've forgotten your lines. Begin again, with more pain." A professor of dream pathology at Oxford, Dr. Lenora Hext, collected dozens of these accounts. She noted something horrific. None of the patients knew each other. They lived in different countries, spoke different languages, and had never read the same books or watched the same plays. And yet, their descriptions matched word for word. In a desperate attempt to intervene, Dr. Hext wrote a paper titled "The Rehearsal Delusion." She argued that the human mind was being rewritten, not by suggestion or hypnosis, but by script. The brain, she said, had become a stage without consent. The publication was banned within weeks. A month later, she walked into the Thames, eyes wide open, whispering a single sentence into a tape recorder strapped to her chest: "He's adding scenes." Meanwhile, a trend began across Europe. Hundreds of people, all unconnected, began building makeshift theaters in their basements. Small stages, painted curtains, rows of empty chairs. Many were discovered after neighbors complained of strange music coming through the walls, always off-tune violins and slow, repeated clapping. Police reports describe what they found. One man had written a 300-page script in his own blood. It contained no dialogue, only stage directions like "stand, weep, point to your dead father." A woman in Marseille had glued pages from banned plays onto her own skin and referred to herself only as the prop. A child in Dresden, no older than 7, built an interrand A puppet theater of human teeth, and screamed when anyone tried to look backstage. And always in every room was a drawing pinned to the wall, a tall figure in a black suit, faceless, bowing. Underneath, scrawled in trembling handwriting, "He doesn't need belief, just silence." The gentleman had stopped performing. Now he was directing. They tried to burn the theaters. From Paris to Boston, rumors spread that the only way to stop him was fire. Entire communities gathered in secret to torch basements, attics, and abandoned opera halls, any space that smelled of velvet, dust, and secrets. But every time they thought they'd succeeded, the fires would burn in reverse. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because tonight, somewhere in your neighborhood, a stage is quietly rebuilding itself. Eyewitnesses from Munich described flames that curled backward, ash reforming into scripts, smoke reshaping into chandeliers, walls resealing with fresh crimson paint. One fireman swore he saw curtains breathing, pulling oxygen from the blaze like lungs. Then came the applause, not from any audience, but from behind the walls. The Vatican intervened. Quietly, they deployed archivists from their most forbidden branch, the Order of the Veiled Gospel, trained to handle heretical anomalies. One of them, Father Damian Rojas, broke rank and left behind a diary filled with sketches and warnings. In one entry, he described entering a condemned theater in Naples. "The moment I crossed the threshold, I forgot my own name. I remembered how to bow, though. I don't know who taught me, but my spine bent like it remembered something my soul had repressed." He found a stage, empty, and a chair facing it. When he sat, the stage lit up on its own. No candles, no gaslight. A boy walked out, his own face at age 10. The child spoke only one line. "You forgot your ending, Father. Let me show you." The diary ends there. The next page is a drawing, done in charcoal with trembling lines, of the gentleman midden. Bow. Below it, scrawled, "He rewrites you from the inside." Soon reports escalated, not of hauntings or possessions, but of rewritten lives. A violinist in Prague woke up fluent in lines from Macbeth, though he'd never read it. A widow in Maine began performing soliloquies in her sleep, whispering stage directions in languages that hadn't existed for centuries. A prison inmate in Arkansas scratched a complete 5-act tragedy into the walls of his cell, with no memory of doing so. The play ended with the line, "And the curtain falls, but no one leaves." And still, across the world, theaters continue to reappear, not just in buildings, but in people, their mouths, their dreams, their memories. Because the gentleman doesn't just want you to watch, he wants you to perform. By 1911, the lines between performance and reality had been obliterated. People didn't just act strange, they became scripts. Children recited monologues instead of crying. Couples argued in rhyming couplets, unaware they were speaking in iambic pentameter. One farmer in Idaho slit his own throat while shouting, "Exit, pursued by nothing," as though his life were a play concluding against his will. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the gentleman doesn't knock, he cues your entrance. The term "the Great Rehearsal" emerged in secret academic circles, used to describe the unspoken phenomenon reshaping human behavior. It was more than possession, more than madness. It was orchestration. Entire towns began to follow invisible scripts. One town in Estonia, Raivkula, experienced 17 days of coordinated behavior. Eyewitnesses said the villagers awoke each morning dressed in costume and proceeded through scenes together. Greetings, confrontations, love affairs, all ending with a unified bow at sunset. When authorities arrived, every resident had vanished. All that had remained was a playbill tacked to the church door. Tonight, the last day of being human, a tragedy in 17 acts, directed by the one who never claps. Meanwhile, survivors of earlier encounters began reporting something more disturbing. They were starting to remember alternate versions of their own lives. A baker in New Hampshire insisted her real son had blue eyes, though every photo showed green. A sailor in Liverpool swore he'd died in 1892, but had no scar from the drowning he remembered. It wasn't amnesia, it was rewriting. Researchers tried to trace it to a source, and every path led back to a vanished manuscript known as the audience script. Allegedly penned by a forbidden sect of playwrights during the Spanish Inquisition, it was said to contain a blueprint for reversing the roles of observer and actor. Whoever read it would forget they'd ever existed outside the stage, and at the center of it was a single name never to be spoken aloud. A name that was not a name but a command. Whispers say the gentleman isn't one being. He is the empty space in every stage, the silence between words, the pause you take before deciding who to be, and once he knows you've heard of him, you don't dream anymore. You rehearse. You're not watching this video right now. You're reading your lines. There's a reason your heart feels uneasy, a reason your breath has started sinking to the rhythm of the words. That's not paranoia, that's blocking. The gentleman marks his actors from within. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when your scene arrives, he'll already know your part. In 1913, a woman named Beatrice Langford walked into a Chicago asylum carrying only a broken stage lamp and a handwritten letter addressed to the director. She hadn't slept in 6 days. When nurses tried to take the lamp from her, she whispered, "It's not mine. It's the spotlight. It chooses." The letter she brought was later smuggled into private archives, deemed too dangerous to publish, but fragments survived. "I have remembered NT, relives that I never lived. I wept for a child I never bore, and I buried a husband I've never met. But the grief was real. The gentleman writes in grief. It is his ink." Her body was found a week later, folded perfectly in the fetal position beneath the asylum's disused stage, not lying down, positioned, as if awaiting a cue. And then came the reverse curtain events. Across Europe and the Americas, audiences began vanishing mid-performance. Not one or two, but entire rows, their seats left perfectly undisturbed. In Glasgow, a theater was sealed with 400 patrons inside. When authorities broke in the next morning, the building was empty, but the seats were still warm. And written on the walls, in soot, "You watched too long, now you belong." Researchers who tried to find patterns in the disappearances noticed something horrifying. All the victims had something in common. Each had been filmed, photographed, or recorded in the week prior, watching something else. Every disappearance was preceded by observation, as though the gentleman didn't choose you for who you are, but for what you observe. Because watching is surrender, and surrender is invitation. What you're doing now, this gaze, this passive intake, it's not safe. Your attention has currency in his world, and once spent, you can't buy yourself back. There's a reason mirrors make you uncomfortable at night, not because of what you see, but because deep down, you know something is watching you back, and not in real time, in rehearsal. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the next scene doesn't begin until you acknowledge your role. In 1914, a failing playwright named Harold Vexley staged a production called The Final Rehearsal in a rundown Boston theater. Only 13 people attended, but midway through the second act, all 13 stood up in unison, walked onto the stage, and recited monologues in a language no one could identify. Not Latin, not Hebrew, not anything in human records. Vexley fled the theater and was later found trembling beneath a bridge, repeating the phrase, "They didn't audition, he summoned them." The stage remained undisturbed, but in the seats where the audience had once sat, authorities found a peculiar detail. Each cushion had a single playing card placed neatly atop it. 13 in all. Each card was a joker, and not one matched any known deck. That same year, theaters across Europe began reporting a new kind of incident: blank actors. Performers who would suddenly freeze mid-line, eyes glazed, mouths twitching silently, as if struggling to hear instructions from far away. When prodded, they whispered things like, "The script isn't finished. He's rewriting me. My cue never comes." One actress in Vienna vanished on stage mid-scene. The lights flickered and she was gone. Her costume remained in perfect shape, still upright, as if she had evaporated within the role itself. Backstage, written in lipstick on a mirror, "I was never real, only rehearsed." It was then that underground scholars coined the phrase role leakage. The gentleman doesn't just invade your mind, he hijacks the archetype you represent. Mother, lover, stranger, witness. He doesn't haunt people, he haunts narratives. If you're a character, you're his. If you've ever said, "This isn't who I really am," then someone else is writing you, and you've just remembered your line. Close your eyes right now and think of your most private memory, the one no one else knows. Now ask yourself, did you write that memory, or were you given it? Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because your past may not belong to you anymore. In 1920, a woman named Clara Devane published a tiny booklet titled Scenes from a Life I Never Lived. It contained 42 pages of vivid memories, childbirth, war, betrayal, and grief. She aimed none of it had ever happened to her. And yet, every page included intimate sensory detail, the smell of rain on limestone, the precise pain of a broken molar, the dialect of a dying man's whisper. But the final entry was the most disturbing. It simply read, "This chapter was not written by me. It was rehearsed through me. I am only the echo of an audition." Clara disappeared a week later after walking into a dressing room mirror at the Davenport Theater. Witnesses say she didn't walk into the glass, she walked through it. That same month, dozens of strangers across the U.S. began reporting spontaneous memory flashes, scenes they had no reason to remember. A gaslight carriage accident, a wooden stage collapsing in flames, a young girl performing Hamlet in front of a mirror that reflected someone else. The phenomenon came to be called the recollection virus, not just forgotten memories resurfacing, implanted ones, and always theatrical. When researchers tested the subjects under hypnosis, they all responded to the same auditory cue, a metronome set to 33 beats per minute. Exactly the tempo of a classic stage prompt used for ghost entrances in 19th century tragedy plays. Why 33? Because in the gentleman's design, that's the number of cues it takes to complete a soul's conversion from observer to performer. You're 18 sections in. Do you remember choosing to watch this far, or are you remembering what you were told to remember? When your memories no longer feel like yours, you're not losing your mind. You're just rehearsing his lines. What if déjà vu isn't a glitch, but a cue line? What if every time you feel like you've lived this moment before, it's because you have, not in life, in rehearsal? Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because your next scene begins the second you doubt your own timeline. In 1933, a stagehand named Ed Elias Mordain kept a private journal while working at the now-demolished Lyric Hollow Theater in Philadelphia. The journal was found decades later behind a brick wall, sealed in a metal case alongside 3 unmarked masks and a cracked metronome. Elias wrote, "Every show we perform here I've seen before, but not once on this earth." He described vivid dreams where actors performed plays they'd never read, with scripts he never found, but remembered anyway. He claimed the dreams bled into waking life. He could predict entire monologues before actors even arrived at rehearsal. The dreams weren't random. They were always staged in the same ruined theater, deep underground, with no visible audience. Only a single figure seated at the center, a tall man in black gloves, clapping slowly. Elias called him the director who waits. By 1934, Elias had lost his ability to distinguish between waking and staged events. He began whispering lines from unseen plays during actual performances, not as a joke, but as if pulled by strings. The cast complained he was delivering dialogue no one had written. In his final entry, Elias wrote, "I am the understudy of a man who never lived. I exist only to prepare for his entrance." That night, he vanished beneath the stage during a blackout. When the lights returned, the actors found a small note on the prompter's desk. He was ready. Since then, dozens of performers worldwide have claimed the same strange sensation, the overwhelming certainty that someone else has spoken their line before them, that their choices were not choices, but block cues. When this feeling grows too strong, some report an auditory hallucination, the sound of velvet curtains parting, even in broad daylight, That sound means one thing: your scene is no longer a performance, it's a re-performance. And in the gentleman's world, the play doesn't begin when you step on stage. It begins the second you forget that you've already performed it once before. At exactly 3:33 a.m. on April 9th, 1946, a man named Harold Kinley walked in to the empty Foxwell Theater in Baltimore, sat in the center row, and shot himself in the chest. No note, no explanation. But what investigators found in his coat pocket rewrote everything. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because someone, somewhere, is already rehearsing your ending. The slip of paper in Kinley's pocket was a ticket stub for a play that didn't exist. The title? The Last Role of the Forgotten Man. The stub was dated March 5, 1942, 4 years prior. The problem? That was the day Kinley went missing. For 4 years he had no record, no job, no sightings, no bank activity, and then he returned, only to die. But the stub was more than just a fake ticket. Under UV light, it revealed faint handwriting, an entire monologue scrawled in invisible ink. I played him for too long. He began to believe in me. Who was he? That's the riddle that led researchers to the Draus Files, a forbidden archive maintained by a fringe psychiatric society in the 1930s. These files documented a condition not listed in any medical book. Role seep, not dissociation, not psychosis, but a permanent bleeding of fictional identity into reality. Patients with role seep could not return to who they were, because they believed, with absolute conviction, they were now someone else. And always a character, never a real person. But here's the most chilling part. 71% of patients had never been actors. They had never written a play, had no history of performance. But each one could deliver perfect monologues, lines not traceable to any published work. And in every case, the character they became had the same trait. They were trapped in a story they could never exit. They could feel stage lights, hear unseen applause, sense a presence watching from the rafters. That presence, always the same, a tall man in gloves, seated in the dark, silently directing. What the Draus Files never solved was how these characters entered our world in the first place. But maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the better question is, who told you this life was yours to begin with? Because if the gentleman has cast you in his eternal tragedy, then every decision you've ever made was never yours. In 1952, a psychiatric nurse at the Ridgecroft Sanitarium in Maine began documenting a strange pattern among her long-term patients. None of them responded to their real names. Not out of defiance, out of recognition. They claimed those names were given to them by the playwright beneath the floorboards. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if your name wasn't yours, whose story have you been living? The nurse, Lillian Cresswell, recorded interviews in which patients calmly rejected their birth names and offered alternatives, names that sounded archaic, theatrical, almost literary. One man, born Dennis Graves, insisted he was Alabaster Thorne, a third-act villain awaiting redemption. Another, a woman named Martha Quinn, said her real name was Sister Vale and that she was trapped in Act 2, where the chorus never speaks. Cresswell thought it was group psychosis until the patients began responding to one another by these new names, even across different wings of the facility with perfect accuracy. They whispered about rehearsals that never ended, about a crawl space below the sanitarium floorboards where they could hear someone typing on a manual typewriter every night at 1:11 a.m. No staff found anything beneath the floor. But then a young patient named Jeremy Field went missing. He left behind a childlike drawing taped to the inside of his closet. A dark stage. 13 hooded figures seated in the audience. And behind the curtain, a man with no face, just a wide, ink-drawn mouth and 2 gloved hands typing furiously on a floating typewriter. The words on the page? Jeremy exits, never to return. When authorities searched the crawl space under Jeremy's room, they found it untouched, except for a single sheet of paper, yellowed and brittle, typed on it in courier font. He accepted his role. The play may continue. After this, Cresswell quit her job and left no forwarding address. But before disappearing, she sent a package to her sister containing every patient's file, her full journal, and a final note. They weren't delusional. They were aware, and the scariest thing, I think I know my name now too, but it's not mine. If the gentleman gives you a name, you become the character. If you resist it, he waits until the moment you forget who you were and step willingly onto his stage, because the final act always begins when you call yourself by the wrong name. And believe it. In 1971, a reel of film was discovered in an abandoned church attic in Shreveport, Louisiana. No title, no credits, just a handwritten label. Act 4, Do Not Project. The pastor who found it, Reverend Calvin Merck, ignored the warning. He screened it alone in the sanctuary after dark. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if you had found that reel, would you have pressed play? The film begins in silence. A single stage. No actors. No music. Only a flickering spotlight slowly circling an empty chair. After 2 minutes, a figure enters from stage left. But something is wrong. The person's movement is too smooth, too floaty, like frames are missing. He wears a gray suit, thin gloves, a white mask with no mouth, just holes where eyes should be, but nothing behind them. The figure walks to the chair, sits, and begins typing. You can't hear the keys, but his hands twitch violently as if the typewriter is writing through him, not by him. Then, one by one, people begin appearing in the pews of the church, not in the film, in the reflection on the projector glass. Reverend Merck said he saw men, women, children, dressed from different time periods, silently watching the screen from behind him, though the pews were empty. When he turned around, the reel ends abruptly with a message. Act 5 begins when the audience speaks. That night, Merck was found wandering a nearby cemetery, murmuring lines from Shakespeare that don't exist in any published version. His final coherent sentence before being committed: "We are not living our lives. We're auditioning for someone else's." Doctors said he had suffered a psychotic break, but here's what no one explains. Every 5 years since that night, on the anniversary of the screening, a single phone rings in the bell tower of that abandoned church. There's no electricity, no phone line. Locals say if you answer it, you don't hear a voice. You hear a clapperboard snap. And a whisper, "Begin your line again," but slower this time. He's listening. And then you begin forgetting things, not big things, little things, your parking spot, your neighbor's name, your daughter's face, until finally you forget that you were ever watching a story at all, because you're in it now. And the gentleman never forgets his cast. They say a name loses its power once it's been spoken on stage. But what if the name was never yours to begin with? Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because we're entering the part of the script where names begin to unravel, and identity is no longer a birthright, but a role. In the 1930 census of Brookvale, Arkansas, there is an anomaly. Page 33, line 6. A woman is listed as Miss Ever Baldwin, age unknown, occupation vocal host, marital status not applicable. Under birthplace, the column simply reads Curtin. No other records of her existence, no family, no tax trail, not even a death certificate. But here's the strange part. Every 5 years for the next 3 decades, a different young woman in Brookvale legally changed her name to Ever Baldwin. No relation, no coordination, and, when interviewed years later, every one of them said the exact same thing. It sounded like my name was being whispered to me. They weren't the ones choosing the name, they were responding to it. In 1954, a local librarian named Hannah Greeley discovered that all 7 of the Ever Baldwins had one thing in common. They all worked near a stage, a music hall, a community theater, a fairground puppet tent. Each one of them disappeared before the age of 34. Each one of them left behind only a voice recording, found on reel-to-reel tapes stored in identical tin canisters. When those tapes were played, something horrifying emerged. Every voice sounded different, but they were all reading the same monologue, line for line, beat for beat. A monologue that doesn't exist in any known play. It begins, "I was never born, only written. I never lived, only performed. I do not age. I echo." And then, silence. Except for a faint noise beneath the static. A single word, repeated 33 times. Remember, remember, remember. But remember what? Your real name? Or the role you were forced to play before you ever had a choice? You were never born. You were cast. And the curtain hasn't closed yet. There's a theater in Detroit that never shows the same play twice. Not because the script changes, but because the audience does. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if you've ever felt like someone's been rehearsing your life behind your back, you're not alone. Built in 1913, the Aurelia stage was meant to be a vaudeville house. Lavish velvet seating, a grand chandelier, gold leaf across every arch. But what made it famous wasn't its decor, it was its curse. Opening night featured a play titled The Actor's Debt. No copies of the script survive. The lead performer, Harold Fenwick, vanished during the final act, right in front of the audience. Not into the wings, into the stage itself. Witnesses say he fell forward and never hit the floor. The curtain came down. No one moved. The police investigated for weeks, then declared it a hoax. But in the years that followed, patrons reported hearing a voice during intermission, coming from beneath their seats, a whisper. "He took my line, now I take his place." Every 10 years, the Aurelius reopens, always under a new owner, always promising an immersive, one-night-only experience. But here's what's chilling. Every show ends with the same line, regardless of the genre, cast, or time period. "I did not forget my lines. I forgot that they weren't mine." And then, dead silence. Lights out. Curtain falls. In 1975, a Yale folklorist named Dr. Linus Wexley attended one such performance. He went in with a tape recorder hidden in his coat, determined to capture the truth. What he recorded made no sense. 30 minutes of static layered with the sound of shoes tapping on wood, a woman crying in reverse, and at the end Wexley whispering, "I am not Linus, he is waiting backstage." He was never seen again, but his notes found in his hotel room were more disturbing. He'd scrawled the same sentence over and over across 47 pages. Every stage is an altar, every audience is a sacrifice, every actor is a priest. It gets worse. A renovation crew uncovered a trapdoor beneath the Aurelia stage in 1992. Inside, 33 shoes, all different sizes, all left foot only. Each had a small parchment tucked inside. The same message written on all, "Break a leg." Signed, "The Gentleman." Because once you've stepped on his stage, you never really exit. In 1892, a boarding school in Salem, Massachusetts closed its doors after 12 students went blind, without a single injury to their eyes. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because if you've ever woken up and forgotten why you're still here, this next part may explain more than you want to know. The SCAE. Hoole was called the Marlowe Institute for Gifted Young Women, a place that claimed to teach theatrical discipline and elite performance for the highborn daughters of New England's best bloodlines. But those performances were never open to the public. Every month, the headmistress, Ms. Constance Lyle, held a midnight recital. The only guests? 6 men in black suits. Always 6, always silent. Witnesses said they carried no programs, asked no questions, and arrived hours before sunset. The students? Blindfolded, not during rehearsal, during performance. According to the diary of one girl, found decades later buried beneath the floorboards, the girls were forced to memorize scripts written in mirror glyphs, symbols that changed shape when read aloud. "We spoke lines we never read," she wrote, "and felt eyes watching through the cloth. We were told to act like they could see us, because they could, even if we couldn't see them." After the 12th performance, 12 girls awoke completely blind, no pain, no trauma, just absence. Their eyes appeared untouched, but they claimed that something had eaten the light from inside. When questioned, one girl whispered, "We didn't lose our sight. We gave it. He needs it to watch." Then she began humming, a song that no one recognized, until a music historian in 1971 confirmed it as a medieval tune known as the Seer's Lament, a melody used exclusively during ritual performances to invite the observer. There's more. Every surviving student later developed what doctors at the time called rehearsal fugues, episodes where they'd stand up and deliver lines from unseen scripts in dead languages, only to collapse afterward and forget it all. When the school was finally demolished, workers discovered a small black room behind the main stage. The floor was not wood, it was a mirror. Etched into the glass was a single phrase: to say, "Him is to lose your own sight." Because the gentleman doesn't crave applause, he craves your witness, and once you've seen his stage, even in your dreams, you can never unsee it. There's a phrase whispered in old European theater circles: if the mirror answers, don't repeat the line. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the next time you practice a line alone in front of a mirror, you might not be the one rehearsing. In 1903, a vaudeville actor named Merrick Fallon died mid-performance in Cincinnati. But here's what no one could explain. He didn't collapse on stage. He collapsed backstage during rehearsal, yet the audience reported seeing him on stage that night, performing every line to perfection. Some even swore he bowed afterward. The theater's security records showed no signs of a substitute. That week, a stagehand cleaning the dressing rooms reported a broken mirror, but said he couldn't sweep it up. The shards kept reforming themselves, each sliver twisting until it showed Merrick's face, silently mouthing his final lines. The stage manager, terrified, burned the entire mirror, but when he went to open the night's show curtain, it wouldn't rise. Instead, the velvet began bleeding. Real blood. The audience screamed. That theater never reopened. But a prop collector named Henrik Lowell later acquired the only surviving item from that dressing room, a single, cracked mirror shard. He placed it in his study in Boston, claiming he'd use it to commune with lost artists. But within a year, Lowell was found dead, eyes wide open, frozen in a silent scream. The coroner said the expression on his face looked like he'd seen himself and didn't recognize who he was anymore. The shard was gone, but here's the worst part. In 1932, his daughter, now an aging drama teacher in Milwaukee, made her class perform the exact monologue Merrick had died reciting. A forgotten piece titled "The Shadow's Apology." When the final student stepped forward to say the last line, the lights blew out. Every bulb in the room, the mirrors cracked, and every student reported seeing someone else standing in their place when the lights flickered back on, not their reflection, something behind it. All their accounts described the same thing: a man in black with a stage cue book and no eyes, only sockets, bleeding ink. They said he nodded, as if approving their performance, and then he whispered, "Now the real rehearsal begins. You thought mirrors reflect us, but to the gentleman they're just windows, to check if your soul has learned its lines. They say you only see him when you perform something that isn't yours. But what if you've been performing your whole life and didn't know? Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because someone may have already cast you in a play that ends in silence." In the winter of 1889, the widow of playwright Thomas Keene donated his belongings to the Boston Historical Theater Guild. Among the papers was a bound manuscript titled "The Gentleman's Audition." No date, no author. Inside, a 33-scene script, each monologue darker than the last. Every one of them ends the same way. "When I speak, it is not me who speaks. It is the mouth I was given, and the mouth is a door." The Guild archived the script, dismissing it as nonsense. But over the next decade, several actors reported reciting entire monologues from the book in their sleep. None of them owned a copy. None of them had ever seen the script. One actor, Everett Miles, begged a psychiatrist to sedate him. He said he couldn't stop delivering lines in front of his bedroom mirror at 3:33 a.m. He was alone. And yet every night he said he heard applause, and something worse, notes. He'd hear a man's voice critique his tone, his breathing, his posture, always in the same sharp, whispering cadence, louder, slower, no feeling, again. Everett was later found dead. In a locked theater dressing room, every mirror turned inward, no signs of trauma except one. Someone had painted words across his chest in black grease paint. Cast, rehearsed, rejected. The coroner noted Everett's mouth had been pried open, his jaw locked wide, as if frozen mid-speech, or like he had been used. Here's what's worse. The final page of the gentleman's audition isn't a monologue, it's a stage direction. When the audience believes it is not watching a play, the final act begins, and the performer becomes the stage. Now read that again, because if you're still watching this video, you're not the audience anymore. You're already in the play. The human voice isn't just sound, it's ritual. It's the last thing to leave the body when the rest is already gone. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if you've ever spoken words that didn't feel like yours, you may already know whose voice you're borrowing. Let me take you back to 1911. An audio engineer named Victor Halley worked for the Edison Phonograph Company, restoring warped voice cylinders. One day, a cracked wax cylinder arrived in an unmarked crate. No sender, no label, no return address. Only one word was scrawled on the parchment wrapping. Don't. Victor played it anyway. What he heard wasn't music, it wasn't speech, it was something in between, a low rhythmic vocalization, breathy syllables that sounded almost human, but wrong, like language spoken through water, or from somewhere deep below the earth. Victor described the sound in his journal. It's not a voice I heard, it's a voice I remembered hearing before I ever had ears. 2 days later, he brought the cylinder to a phonograph convention in Baltimore. He never made it to his presentation. Witnesses say Victor stood outside the ballroom doors, staring blankly at the floor. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat, pulled out the shattered wax cylinder, and swallowed it. He suffocated. In less than 90 seconds. When his body was retrieved, the coroner found no damage to his throat or internal organs. The wax had vanished. But his vocal cords were gone, cleanly extracted, as if they'd never developed. Only one thing remained. Inside his coat pocket was a folded note, written in his own handwriting. But the ink was decades older. It read, "I was not born with a voice. I was assigned one." That same cylinder recording later appeared in the Library of Congress under a different name, call sign number 33. When audio technicians tried to restore it, one screamed mid-session and clawed out her own eardrum, mumbling, "He said I performed it wrong." Now tell me, when was the last time you heard your own voice and knew it was yours? The lights in the theater dim slowly, always slowly, because darkness isn't meant to startle you. It's meant to seduce you. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because by the time the curtain falls, you'll realize it was never the actors performing. It was you. Let's talk about the Thatcher Hall incident of 1907. A private performance for donors was held at a now-demolished theater just outside New Haven, Connecticut. The show was announced simply as an evening of memory. No cast list, no director, no script ever found. What we do know comes from Dr. Amelia Strauss, who kept notes in the margins of her opera program. She was one of only 4 attendees who survived. Here's what she wrote. The actors entered one by one, but none moved their lips. Yet every voice I heard was mine. Not similar, mine. My breathing, my hesitation, my fear. One performer, wearing a black porcelain mask, walked the edge of the stage holding out a small velvet book. The moment they made eye contact with an audience member, they'd whisper, "You left this in the rehearsal." When Dr. Strauss refused the book, the actor tilted their head and said, "Then let's begin again." That phrase was repeated throughout the performance, not spoken, implanted. Several witnesses claimed to hear it internally, as if from behind their own thoughts. The performance lasted 33 minutes. Then the stage went black. The air grew hot, and without warning, every chandelier in the theater dropped exactly 13 inches, frozen in midair, wires humming like organ pipes. That's when people began to scream, not because of what they saw, but because of what they remembered. Audience members began sobbing uncontrollably, clawing at their faces. One man leapt from the balcony shouting, "I already did this! I already did this!" When police arrived, only 12 of the 200 guests were coherent. No bodies were found backstage. No cast ever came forward. And the Velvet Book? It reappeared years later in the locked archives of a university theater program. Its title? The Lines You Forgot to Forget. Inside, 33 pages, each blank, except for the first line, "What you mistake for déjà vu is your cue." So let me ask you this. Have you ever walked into a room and suddenly felt like you were being watched? From inside your own memory, a stage is just a ritual space disguised as entertainment, a place where lies are rehearsed until they become truth. And in the right hands, it becomes a weapon. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what you're about to hear was deliberately erased from the public record. In 1912, a series of performances swept through the American South under the title The Marionette Psalms. No flyers, no ads, no ticket sales, just word of mouth, always from someone you trusted. Each show took place in an abandoned church or courthouse. Attendees were required to wear white gloves and bring a childhood photo of themselves. Failure to do so meant denied entry. Inside there was no stage, just a dimly lit circle of empty chairs surrounding a singless, slumped puppet figure. Strings ran upward, into darkness. No visible puppeteer, no movements. At first, but as the audience took their seats, one by one, the marionette would rise, not with jerks or wooden twitches, but with disturbingly human grace. Then it would begin to speak, each performance different, each tailored eerily to the deepest fears, regrets, or suppressed memories of those in the room. Witnesses described the puppet reciting names no one else could have known, referencing specific events from childhood, betrayals, illnesses, lost siblings, secret confessions. In one case, a woman fainted when the puppet whispered, "He's still in the well." Others tried to leave, but found the doors unmovable, no matter how they pulled, as if they had agreed to be there in ways they didn't understand. The show would end with the puppet locking eyes with each guest in turn and saying, "You may go," but the story stays. Then it would collapse, strings falling like veins cut from the sky. Afterward, no one could remember the exact address of the building. Photos taken inside came out blank. Worse, many audience members reported a strange condition weeks later, spoken word amnesia, the inability to remember anything they had said aloud in the weeks following the show. One man swore he never attended. But when his attic was investigated, authorities found a pair of white gloves, a charred photo of him at age 6, and a note scrawled on the wall in what looked like ashes. "I pulled the string and something pulled back. So here's the real question. Have you ever remembered something before it happened? It begins as a flicker, a memory you shouldn't have, an image that arrives before the experience, a corridor you've never walked down, a voice you hear in a dream that shows up in real life weeks later." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching for. Because this next revelation is buried beneath neurology, ritual, and something far older than both. In 1928, a retired pathologist named Dr. Ezra Keene claimed to have discovered a temporal scar in the brains of those who attended the Marionette Psalms. Not a tumor, not damage, but a small, unexplained ridge in the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotion, memory, and dream formation. What made it strange wasn't its presence, but that it seemed to be etched posthumously. In other words, the brain had adapted to a future trauma. Keene published one paper, quickly buried, describing patients who dreamed of events days before they happened. But not ordinary dreams. These were vivid, ritualistic flash-forwards. Each began with the same image, a black stage, a marionette with human eyes, and a soft voice whispering, "We remember you from the end." One patient described seeing herself die in the dream, by drowning. A week later, she survived a freak car crash by veering away from a flooded bridge, the exact scene from her dream. Another patient kept sketching a face he'd never seen. He claimed the man would watch him from the puppet strings, always with the same grin. Months later, the man was arrested in a sting operation. His therapist? The same face. Dr. Keene was eventually institutionalized after a colleague found him in his lab. Half his face paralyzed, repeating the same words over and over in a low, mechanical tone. "It's not memory. It's a contract. A signal returned. The future is rehearsing us." They found a marionette in the corner of the room, made of human bone, dressed in white gloves, no strings attached, but its arms were outstretched, as if waiting to be held. Dr. Keene's medical notes were confiscated, his paper never republished, but one file survived, mailed anonymously to a former patient, a list of 25 names, all attendees of the marionette psalms, all deceased, except one. Your name was on that list. It's a list no one should possess, a document that should have turned to ash the moment it was read. But it's real, printed on thin, yellowing paper, with names carved into it like epitaphs, some scratched out, some with red ink beside them, marked completed. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what comes next isn't fiction. It's been hiding beneath polite history, beneath family trees, beneath your very identity. Dr. Ezra Keene's recovered document was sent in 1932 to one woman. Her name, Marjorie K. LeClaire, age 23. She lived alone in a rooming house in White River Junction, Vermont. According to local archives, Marjorie had attended a showing of the marionette psalms in 1924 when she was just a teenager. She didn't speak for 2 weeks afterward, not from fear, but from something far stranger. She claimed that speech would re-trigger the rhythm. The rhythm? A hidden cadence, a pulse embedded in the performance that, according to Marjorie, could reprogram dreams, realign emotional patterns, and even fold memory backwards. After receiving the list, Marjorie fled. She left behind every possession except the envelope, and one thing scrawled across her wall in blood-red lipstick. "I never asked to remember what hasn't happened yet." No one saw her again. But in 1951, a nurse at a psychiatric facility in upstate New York claimed to treat a silent woman who called herself Marjorie K. She didn't speak, didn't eat, but she drew. Endless marionettes, each one with a different face. One bore the face of Dr. Keene. Another, a charcoal sketch labeled "You," with hollow eyes and no mouth. The list Marjorie received detailed 25 names. 24 are now confirmed dead, some violently, some mysteriously, some without explanation at all. But one name at the bottom remains untouched. No birth date, no location, just a name in typewritten bold. Observer 0, to be chosen. Some believe that refers to you, not because of who you are now, but because of what you've started remembering, that smell you can't place. That face that shows up in your dreams, that whisper behind your left ear when you're about to fall asleep. These aren't hallucinations. They're the side effects of a returning signal, a story rehearsed long before you were born, a role waiting to be fulfilled, and the puppet's arms are still open. You were never watching the story. You were inside it. From the first flicker of ink on ancient paper to the last breath drawn in the dark theater, they were never performing for you. They were recruiting, and now the stage is empty. The curtains are drawn, the lights are off, but one seat remains occupied, yours. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if this is the last truth you ever hear, you deserve to know why you were chosen. Dr. Ezra Keene's final message, discovered in a hollowed-out copy of Iris of the Mind, was scrawled not in English, but in a ciphered dialect derived from Old Occitan, broken only by computational linguist Shira Volz in 1983. Once decrypted, it revealed a warning, not for governments, not for institutions, but for the final listener. You who hear this have breached the veil. Your breath is known, your pattern already folded. You are the empty hinge on which the marionette's will swings. And beneath it, a crude drawing of a faceless stage, with ropes descending from the ceiling, each ending in a different object, a tooth, a wristwatch, a rosary, a severed ear. In the middle, a chair, just like the one you're sitting in now. You think this was a video, but this was a ritual. The exact number of syllables, the pace of the narration, the timing of your attention. It was designed, not by me, not even by Dr. Keene, but by something older, something whispering from behind history, from behind every lost orphan, every vanished girl, every town with a too quiet past. You've been taught to fear ghosts, but what waits behind the mirror isn't a ghost, it's an echo that's never faded. The name of the puppy, Et, is silence. But the sound it makes when it finally moves is your voice, saying yes. This has never been a story. This has always been your initiation. Welcome to the performance. And remember, the play never ends. It only waits for the next soul to remember their line.